It's with great pleasure that we welcome back Dr. Linda Carlson. In fact, it was July 12th, 2017, when we last had the privilege of having Dr. Carlson join us. So much has happened since then, and despite COVID-19 restrictions, if my math is correct, Dr. Carlson's contributed to something like 51 peer-reviewed publications. Her team Carlson, which is made up of an impressive group of scholars, including several postdoctoral fellows, PhD students, and honor students, is currently involved in 5 different studies with intriguing titles like the Chemo Gut or the Virtual Mind Study. In addition to notable TED Talks and podcasts, Dr. Carlson has presented at speaking engagements and conferences across Canada and around the world. We are so very fortunate to have her back with us again this evening. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Carlson.
This time I'm going to talk more specifically about managing stress during a cancer journey using mindfulness meditation in particular. So I'll talk a little bit about, kind of generalities of what it's like to have cancer. Of course, you all know that from personal experience, but what does the sort of research show us? What do we know as professionals who help people cope? There's a little bit in here, again, the last couple of years have thrown everybody for a loop. So a little bit around how COVID has specifically impacted people coping with cancer. And then a more general discussion of what we call the mix of 6. So these are sort of health, behavior, protective factors. And then I'll hone in on a bit more through the stress management through mindfulness and tell you about our mindfulness-based cancer recovery program. And we'll do a few little experiential exercises around practicing mindfulness. And I'll give you some little tips that we call balancing breath minis. So little exercises, just take a couple of minutes that you can do wherever you are. So let's talk a little bit about, the illness experience generally, and specifically, the key sort of features of going through cancer. One of the biggest and most difficult things is this feeling of loss of control. So it kind of comes out of left field. Often we feel like we kind of, know what's going on with our bodies and our minds, and we have a sort of plan for our lives. And this sort of comes out of nowhere and often is a really big surprise and throws things really into turmoil. And no matter how good the prognosis, and with many types of cancers, PROSTAID included, we have very high survival rates. But even so, you hear the word cancer and immediately it's a life threat. You think, oh my God, am I going to die? So it makes people think a bit more about, their lives and their mortality, and how am I living my life, and how do I actually want to live my life? Knowing that it may be shorter or different than I thought, what's important to me. So it gets people to sort of think about those existential things. And then there's this loss of routine, loss of certainty. You sort of had this life plan. I'm going to retire. I'm going to do this and that. And, even the day-to-day routine, if you're working, is thrown out of whack if you have to take time off. So it sort of throws that up in the air as well. There's many feelings people often experience, quite normally and understandably. There can often be kind of a sense of loss or grief. There's always sort of fear about the future, the unknown. There can be feelings of anger or resentment, why me? Or perhaps there's shame or guilt if a person feels like some behavior that they've done over the years has contributed to the cancer, and feelings of depression and anxiety, all of that. And then there's the symptoms that can be related to the disease and the treatment sometimes. So often people experience pain. Fatigue is the most common side effect of many cancer treatments. Difficulty sleeping, waking up in the middle of the night, and that kind of brain fog or chemo brain, where it's like I had tonight, those kind of things are more pronounced. They're forgetting things or having difficulty with word finding, that sort of thing. Now, after treatment's completed, almost everybody, again, no matter how good the prognosis, it worries about it coming back, right? So every ache and pain can get your mind going about, oh no, what does that mean? What is this a sign of? So there's that fear of recurrence. And then every time you have to go for a checkup or a scan, it intensifies often. And then for caregivers as well, we like to think about the experience of being a caregiver, because all the attention is on the patient often, but it's no it's no cup of tea being the caregiver too, and having to, support a person through all of this. So we need to think about that as well. And then we bring in COVID, right? So why does that add to our stress and anxiety? Well, it turns out that COVID has a lot of the same characteristics as cancer itself. There's uncontrollability, there's a high uncertainty, right? We don't know how it's all going to play out. Is this the last wave? Can we go back to normal? What's the future going to hold? And then it is of high consequence. It's important, right? We don't want to get sick. We don't want to, compromise our health or those of our family. So all of these features of a situation are what adds to stress. So it sort of compounds for many people what you're already going through. And this is just a link to an article I wrote about this. So if we look at who's at risk, or what are the risk factors generally for experiencing anxiety and depression, and these hold for people going through cancer, then having a history of mental health problems is always a risk factor. So if you've had depression or anxiety or anything like that in the past, you're more likely to experience it during a time of stress. If you've got problems with your sleep patterns already, if you're, already suffering with insomnia, or you're sleeping during the day and not getting enough sleep at night. If you're someone who's very sensitive or has intense reactions to stress already. If you're someone who tends to worry and ruminate. We all know those people, they're just kind of the worriers, right? All thinking of all the ways things can go wrong. That just gets intensified again when there's a period of extreme stress. And also our coping behavior. So for people who kind of deny things or distract or avoid, that tends to be unhelpful as well. And it's really important when you go through a stressful time to have support from your close people in your life, your loved ones, your family and friends. So if there's already tension in a relationship or lack of social support, that's a risk factor for not doing so well. And if you're socially isolated, right? So if you're sort of starting out feeling sort of lonely and by yourself, and then going through COVID and going through cancer, definitely makes it harder to cope. And this is just another link to an article that talks about these risk factors. And so there, with the whole cancer and COVID thing, there's been increased anxiety about catching the virus. People weren't sure at first if you're much higher risk if you have cancer, uncertainty about how much to self-isolate. Some people are still really staying to themselves and unclear about what's safe. Is it safe? The mask rules are done. Is it fine for me to go out to the grocery store and all those places? How do and when do I ease these protective measures? And then there's been documented a lot of people having delayed treatments, having delayed appointments, having to switch care to virtual. So it's really impacted people in a lot of ways. And then the advice is constantly changing, right? It's like, oh yeah, you need 2 vaccines. No, you need 3. No, you need 4. And then all these different variants coming on. So it's all this stuff sort of piling one on the other. So that's kind of the bad news, I guess, all the stuff everyone's coping with. But there are lots of things you can learn and lots of tools you can use to help address that. So I'm going to introduce you to a concept called Integrative Oncology. And this is a medical subspecialty where we look at treating the whole person. So we're looking not just at the body and the physical part, but also the mental, the mind, the spirit. And so the idea with integrative oncology is that it's very collaborative, it's patient-centered, it's focused around each individual's needs and values, but it combines conventional cancer care, and that's things like surgery, radiation therapy, chemo, but also complementary approaches, things like mind-body therapies, nutritional therapies, exercise, lifestyle medicine. So really integrative oncology is about combining those different approaches to get the best treatment plan for each person. It's evidence-based, so we're always looking at what the research tells us about what different therapies are helpful. And the goal really through integrative oncology is to increase the efficacy of conventional cancer treatments, reduce the side effects of those treatments, improve treatment tolerance, manage symptoms, and help improve overall quality of life. So actually at the Tom Baker, we have developed an integrative oncology program, and we're actually just beginning to start a consultation service where people can get referred from their healthcare provider if they have high needs around symptom management during treatment, and they'll get a one-on-one consultation and develop an integrative oncology plan. So I want to mention also this book called Anti-Cancer Living. It's actually really good because it talks about all the different things you can do for yourself to decrease your risk of getting cancer in the first place, but also help you cope and decrease your risk of recurrence later on. So these are the sort of 6 and the evidence-based things that we know we can do. One is around what you eat. Another one's around physical activity and the importance of getting regular physical activity. Stress management, I'm going to talk a bit about that in this talk. Sleep, also very important, I've already mentioned. Love and support, I've already mentioned. And the 6th factor is environmental toxins. So what you surround yourself with in the environment, and this ranges from, pollutants in the air to sort of plastics and all that kind of stuff. So this book, written by a colleague of mine, Lorenzo Cohen, and his wife, Allison Jeffries, is actually a really good overview of all those areas. And it's very scientific and evidence-based. So it's something I'd recommend reading for sure. So I'm going to talk about stress management and a little bit about sleep, specifically through a program of mindfulness. So I know this is a hot topic. I don't know how many of you guys have heard about this. I don't know. I can see some of you. Why don't you wave your arm around if you're familiar with mindfulness? Yeah, a few arms. So, it's out there in the public, and some of you might have even taken our program or done some mindfulness in other ways. But I like to show these magazine covers here from Time magazine, and I think it illustrates some of the myths or misunderstanding. Here Time magazine tells you if you meditate, you turn into this beautiful, blissful young woman, right? But that's not necessarily the case. That's a bit of a misunderstanding. So if we take a step back and look at our definition of mindfulness, it's defined as paying attention on purpose in the present moment with an open and accepting attitude. So we're going to break that down for you in a minute, but there's really sort of 2 ways of thinking about this. It's a way of being in the world. So you can kind of be more or less mindful no matter what you're doing at any given time. If you're paying attention to what you're doing, whether it's washing the dishes or, driving to work, then you're being mindful. So it doesn't take extra time to be mindful when you do things, but it's also a practice that you specifically do set aside time to do, to train yourself in. So you can think of it as a skill as well. And these cartoons illustrate those 2 ways, those sort of 2 definitions. So this is mindfulness is a way of being in the world, right? And you can see the human, the joke is, their mind's full, and the dog is just mindful. The dog just sees what's there, right? So, they're naturally better than us at being in the present moment. And then this illustrates just the idea of doing mindfulness meditation as a practice to train your mind how to be that way. And so the question is, well, why aren't we all mindful all the time? And I'm sure if I were to ask you this question, what's your mind doing? If it's not in the present moment, most of you would be able to sort of tell me what your mind gets up to. And so there's been studies that have looked at this. And it turns out we have anywhere from 50 to 70,000 thoughts every single day. It's a lot of different thoughts, right? And so if you kind of ping people throughout the day and say, hey, what are you thinking about? And how are you feeling? And what are you doing? What they found from these studies is that about half the time people are not in the present moment. So they're not being mindful, their mind's wandering. And some people, when I show that stat, are like, wow, I thought it would have been higher. I'm never paying attention to what I'm doing. But let's say about half the time. And at the same time, when they ask people, what are you thinking about? What are you doing? And how are you feeling? When they said, yeah, I'm thinking about what I'm doing, they were happier. So they were happier when their attention and their focus was in the present moment, no matter what they were doing. They could be at work, they could be at school, whatever. If they're paying attention, they're happier. So why would that be the case? Well, if you're not paying attention, what are you doing? Right? So you might be like this woman where your mind is in the past. She's thinking, oh, why did I say that? Why did I do that? If only, this or that had happened, I wouldn't be in this situation, right? So she's having regrets. She's beating herself up. She's feeling sad. She maybe even is getting angry at herself or other people, right? So she's ruminating about the past. And a lot of people spend considerable time there. You can't change the past, right? So this sort of beating yourself up is a bit futile. Or you might be one of those people who's zooming off to the future, like this guy, right? He's thinking of all the things he has to do. And oh my goodness, how am I ever going to get it done? And what about this? And what if this happens? And, it's a disaster. And feeling very overwhelmed and stressed and anxious, right? So, you may be like, either ruminating in the past, worrying about the future. And that's why you're not happy when your mind does that, right? Because it's bringing up all these, potential disasters that are probably never going to happen. So when we're able to be in the present moment, things are usually not so catastrophic, right? Things are usually kind of okay. But the problem is that our minds are just not very good at doing that because they've been trained otherwise. So the idea is to just be more focused in the now rather than worrying about yesterday that you can't change and planning for tomorrow that you never know what's going to happen. So focusing more in the now and doing what you can in the moment, right? To set yourself up for success. And so if we break mindfulness down into components, we talk about 3 components, kind of the why, the what, and the how of mindfulness. So the why of it is intention. So why do you do it? In our definition, it says you do it on purpose, but what's the purpose really? So this varies depending on where you're at in your life and in your journey with mindfulness, but it might be as simple as I just want to be present for my life, right? I just want to be there to engage with my family. I don't want to miss everything. Other intentions might be more specific, like I want to help myself sleep better. I want to control my symptoms. And the intention is really just the motivation. It's sort of what keeps you going. So that's kind of why you do it. What do? You're paying attention in the present moment. So this is actually the core of the practice. And I like to think of it as a skill, a kind of a training, right? So we're just like, for example, learning the piano or learning to play a sport, tennis or golf, right? You don't become an expert by watching videos, by reading books. It's like developing a skill. You have to actually do it, right? You don't get a killer serve at tennis if you just read about serving at tennis, or if you listen to piano music, you're not going to be a concert pianist, right? You have to actually do the work, do the practice. And so the practice is this meditation. It's this purposefully sitting down, and all we're actually doing is bringing our awareness, when it wanders, back to the present moment. And it can be many elements of the present moment. It can be what your experience is in your body. It can just be following your breath. It can be monitoring your thoughts and feelings. But the idea is that we're training our minds to behave in a different way than they have been trained all our lives, as we've learned to think about the past and plan for the future. So every time our mind does that, we bring it back. And so it's building this new skill, this attentional training. So that's what we're actually doing, the core of the practice. But what's also important is how we do it, the attitude that we approach it with. So it's important to have an open and accepting attitude rather than a very critical, harsh attitude, which is easy because when you sit down and pay attention to your mind, you're like, oh my God, my mind is all over the place. Like we talk about monkey mind, right? It's jumping from branch to branch. I have like no control over it. So it's easy to say, oh, there's no way I can meditate and get my mind to settle. I suck at this. And so we can be very critical of ourselves. So the attitude of this open, kindness, patience, and here's some of the key attitudes, kind of not judging ourselves or getting down on ourselves, being patient. It takes time. It's not one of these things. It's not a fast food, I want to relax. I want to relax right now. I'm going to, just try really, really hard and I'll be able to get it. It's more like, no, it develops over a period of practice. It takes time. And so we need to try and be a little patient. We need to accept where we're at. Often, especially when people are in an uncomfortable place or they're having difficult emotions, we want to just stuff that all down and say, no, everything's fine. Everything's going to be great. Right. And in that case, we're not really accepting our experience in the moment, so it doesn't mean you have to like it. It doesn't mean it's going to stay that way forever. And it's not like giving up, but it's just seeing things clearly and accepting that, yep, this is what I've got on my plate right now. That's okay. Doesn't mean I can't do anything to change it. It's just saying, this is what it is, right? Accepting it. And then these other things like letting go of the need to control things that we really have no control over. And this idea of non-striving is around the kind of paradox of meditation and stress reduction too, is that the harder we try for an outcome, the less likely we are to even get there. So you have to kind of just put it on the shelf and just focus on being in the moment and trusting your intuition, trusting the practices, and approaching it with this thing called beginner's mind, which is sort of seeing things as if for the first time with an open mind, rather than all these sort of judgments we might have. Oh, I can't meditate, or meditation's stupid, or, it's new agey gobbledygook, right? It's like, well, I don't know, thousands, millions of people do this. Maybe there's something to it, right? This kind of beginner's mind. So these are just some of the attitudes. Other ones are kind of curiosity, openness, self-compassion, kindness. And this is a tall order. And often people say, well, you're asking me to sort of change the entire way I am. And I like to just sort of turn it on its head and say, well, if you don't move towards this way of approaching your life, what's the opposite? Right? So you would be a judgmental, impatient, rejecting, grasping, striving, suspicious know-it-all, right? I mean, and maybe that describes people and if it does, they're probably not very happy people or very pleasant people. And so, we probably don't want to do that to ourselves. And so keeping these attitudes in mind can be helpful in that respect. All right, so I mentioned some of the myths around mindfulness. So what is mindfulness not? It's not just relaxation. Okay, so it's not just resting on the beach. In fact, sometimes it's not relaxing at all. Sometimes it is. It's not a kind of hypnosis or sort of mind control that, someone does to you. It's also not really a religious practice. It's not a form of prayer, although it can be incorporated into any kind of religious practice you might already have. So it's sort of a secular mind training practice. It's not clearing your mind of all thoughts. So that's a misconception too, is that like the women on the magazine, oh, they look so blissful. Their mind is blank, they're just in this peaceful place. It's about being present for everything in your life, the ups, the downs, the anger, the frustration, and being present for it with these accepting and kind attitudes. So it may be peaceful and calm, and it may be relaxing, but it's not always, and nor is it meant to be, right? So when we hold these kind of misconceptions, that's when we tend to think, oh, I can't do it. My mind's jumping. That's the nature of our experience, is that our mind is going to jump around, and that's okay. We can be aware of that and accepting of that, and very patiently train our minds to be more focused. So just to summarize it all up, I guess, the only certainty in life is change. So that's the idea of non-attachment, is letting go of trying to hold on to things or push things away. It's a recognition that really things are in constant flux. And so the unwillingness to acknowledge and act upon this reality of constant change is thought to be the root cause of all suffering. And you can think about that and sort of explore it in your meditation practice. And mindfulness is one process that helps us face and accept the inevitability of change, because when we struggle against it, that's what causes our suffering. So we use a lot of poetry in the program I run. And I like this one from Thoreau. You've seen it. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. Right? So this is about being awake and aware for your life. So here is actually where we do a little mindfulness exercise. So you can look at this nice, calm ocean scene, or you can close your eyes. And what I'd like you to do is sort of sit up if you're slumping, which many of us do. Sort of sit up in your chair, put your feet flat on the floor if they reach, sort of roll your shoulders back, and just notice if you're all hunched over, just sort of open up through your chest so there's room for your breath. And you put one hand kind of on your upper chest here, and another one lower down on your belly. And notice any judgmental thoughts that arise about your belly, right? Let them go. And we're just going to do kind of a breath awareness exercise. So I don't want you to change anything about your breath, but if you're comfortable just closing your eyes. And I don't need to tell you to breathe because you already are, but just pay attention to it. So don't try and change it, but just notice where you feel that movement in your hands. So you probably feel some movement when you breathe in, and notice how that breath is. Is it like, how long is it? Is it smooth, or there's some pauses? And then when you transition from the in to the out breath, Notice how that happens. Is there a pause? Is it smooth? And then with each out breath, where do you feel that movement? Okay, and notice if there's sort of evenness in the length of the in and the out. And without judging, so use those attitudes. Just noticing, is there tension in your belly or your legs, even in your shoulders or face? So being sort of like a breath detective. Seeing what you can notice about the length, the smoothness, the pauses, the movement of the hands. And you may notice your monkey mind jumping off the breath, and that's normal too. So when you do notice it though, just lead it back. You may notice other things about your body too as you're breathing, maybe your stomach grumbling or your heart beating. And even though I told you not to try to change your breath, you may notice it changing on its own. Just lowering your hands, open up your eyes. And so just think a bit about what you noticed there. And normally if you're in person, I'd kind of ask how many of you noticed more movement in your upper hand or your lower hand. And so for example, movement of the hand, if you noticed, the breath was choppy or it was more in the upper chest, that kind of stuff. Did you notice that the breath changed? How did it feel? Was it comfortable or not? That kind of stuff. There's someone. More movement in the belly. Yeah. And, typically what people notice is actually the opposite, more movement in the chest when we're not paying attention. And often when you start to pay attention, the breath sort of slows down or it becomes a little deeper. And really the point of the exercise isn't that, oh, here we go. Shallow breathing. As soon as you said not to change it, it changed. And that's actually a good lesson, right? Because when we try too hard, I should breathe in a certain way, that can make it challenging. And so if you just sort of let the breath do its own thing and pay attention to it, it tends to actually kind of just even out. And often there's a sense of feeling a little more calm. All right, I'm going to carry on and tell you a bit about some of these mindfulness programs. So the most well-known one that it trains people in an 8-week program on how to kind of do mindfulness meditation and bring it into your life. It's called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And it was developed, actually, it's been around 40 years now by a guy named Jon Kabat-Zinn in the States. And this book here called Full Catastrophe Living, again, highly recommended reading if you want to learn more about this approach. Nice book, easy to read, lots of stories. And so the MBSR, as it's known, program is an 8-week group-based program, and it sort of has a curriculum where it combines stress reduction techniques with this mindfulness meditation training. And so there's been lots of research over the years. So the research started in the 1970s looking at this program and has really spanned a huge wide range of different conditions over the years. If you're interested in this from a research perspective, there's a website called American Mindfulness Research Association, and it has all the research that's been done. There's thousands and thousands of studies now. And actually this graph shows you, if you're curious about that, kind of the volume of research in the area of mindfulness in the scientific research. So this gives you the number of scientific journal articles that have come out over the years with mindfulness in the title. And so what you can see here essentially is that for many, many years leading up to about the year 2000, there was 1 or 2 a year. It wasn't a very popular area. But then around the year 2000 or so, that's when actually we did our first study on mindfulness for people with cancer. So, in the early days, there still weren't very many publications when we started, but it's just gone up exponentially, right? So now there's over, and this chart's a little older, it was 2019. So the 2020, 2021 stats are over 1,000 papers every year on mindfulness. And these are scientific papers. So there's a huge amount of evidence now looking at its benefits across a wide range of populations. So I'll tell you a bit about our work specifically for cancer patients, survivors, and families. And so, I already talked about the cancer experience a bit, right? And I love this cartoon because the spider's talking to the shrink and he says, "My life's a mess, doc. You got to help me. I just seem to be spinning out of control," right? And that's often that experience of loss of control. And so we actually already went through this, but you can think now about all these things that many people are coping with, and how can this mindfulness approach and the mindfulness attitudes address some of these problems? And it turns out that what we're learning are skills in what we call emotion regulation. So the ability to respond more thoughtfully to these things as they arise, and these attitudes of acceptance, this non-attachment and letting go and self-compassion, all of these things really help us address these common problems quite directly and can be very beneficial. So we created this group called Mindfulness-Based Cancer Recovery, MBCR, and it's been offered at the Tom Baker since we started in 1996, some of my colleagues and me. And they had a program they were developing based on their personal practice. And I came in 1997 and I knew about John Kabat-Zinn and MBSR. And I said, "Hey, that's a great idea. Let's develop this for people with cancer." And so we started doing it clinically, offering it through the Psychosocial Resources Department in 1998. And we've had a program ever since then. So it's open to cancer patients and family members. We do it in groups of 15 to 20 people in person, sort of smaller groups. We're doing it on Zoom the last 2 years. We usually have around 12 or so people, and well over 3,000 over the years. And so we have this ongoing program that's offered clinically, and we do research studies within it. So it's similar to the MBSR program. It started with 8 weeks, now it's 9. On Zoom, we do 2-hour weekly meetings, and every meeting is similar. There's the discussion. We do have home practice that we check in with, and then there's movement. So mindful movement, it's simple, gentle yoga. And then we do different meditation exercises through the weeks to help train people in this capacity to be mindful. So we have a booklet that we hand out to patients, and it outlines the program, includes a reading list. And so they're encouraged to do daily meditation practice throughout the program, and, to sort of retrain their minds basically to be more mindful as they go through everyday life. They keep track of their homework, and we have a silent retreat, a longer period of practice near the end of the program. So we wrote this book, Michael Specka and I, called Mindfulness-Based Cancer Recovery, back in 2011. And these are some of the translations. It's been translated in a whole pile of different languages. And this is for patients to read. And basically our idea was that it would be a home study of the course. If you can't take it in person, you can kind of follow the book, and it takes you through all the different components. It has guided meditations and everything. So the types of meditation practices that we use in the Mindfulness-Based Cancer Recovery Program are a range of more, traditional practices, but a real wide range. And so one's called the body scan, and that's all these people lying there looking like they're having naps. They're actually doing a body scan, which is a guided meditation where we direct their attention very slowly and carefully through each part of the body. And they pay attention and sort of learn to tune in to what the body's doing and telling them. Sitting meditation, there's a guy in the chair there, so you don't have to sit on the floor like a pretzel to do the meditation. You can do it comfortably in a chair. Walking meditation is also a traditional practice where we sort of slow it down and pay attention, do it mindfully. Open awareness meditation, where we begin to sort of open up our awareness to everything that is arising in the moment. And we use imagery, things like mountain and lake images, to help embody some of the qualities of the mountain and the lake that we're trying to emphasize in ourselves. And then loving kindness practice too, where we learn to develop more compassion for ourselves and others. And so we also include the movement I mentioned, and that the idea with the movement practice, the yoga or the mindful movement, is to reconnect with the physical body, because we're embodied beings, right? This idea that the head separate from the body is actually kind of harmful for many people. So it's about sort of really reconnecting with what the body's telling us, how it feels, and the movement practice helps with that. All right, so I'm not going to go through a million graphs and charts, although I could, and I love to do that, but I'm just going to summarize that for you guys. So we started our research program, like I said, back in 1998, and I've actually published over 200 papers now in peer-reviewed journals, and probably 50 of them would be in the mindfulness area. And so we started out looking at the common symptoms that I mentioned, right? And just measured people usually before they did the program and then after, and we might have compared them to a group of people not doing the program who were similar. And what we've seen is decreases in stress symptoms, a whole range of them, from muscle tension to sort of physical experience of stress, habitual patterns, things people would do like nail biting and teeth grinding, all those kind of things improve. Better mood, less anger, less anxiety, less feelings of depression, improvements in sleep. So people actually are sleeping better after they do this program. They feel less fatigued. They do tend to ruminate less about the past and worry less about the future. And we've done work with caregivers and partners too, and showing that it benefits them as well in similar ways. And then we sort of, people were telling us, that's great, I want to relieve these symptoms, but, can we use this program to actually live our lives better, to flourish, to thrive through a cancer experience? And so simple things like quality of life can improve, but other concepts like spirituality and post-traumatic growth, spirituality it's not religiosity, like how much you go to church, but it's considered, do you feel a connection with something larger than yourself, with, some sense of meaning and purpose. And post-traumatic growth is a similar idea that sometimes a traumatic event can be a catalyst to examine how you're living your life and, potentially change things that weren't working for you. Find more alignment with your values and live an authentic life with meaning and purpose. And so people started telling us about those kind of changes too that happened through this practice. And then finally, I have a background in what's called psychoneuroimmunology, which is looking at the science of the mind-body connection. And so we like to look at how the mindfulness gets under the skin, as they say. And so you can do that by taking blood samples, by taking saliva samples, by doing things like looking at blood pressure. And so we've done a number of those studies over the years and shown that people who do the program have things like decreases in elevated systolic blood pressure. The stress hormone cortisol, we've looked at that too and shown that it kind of regulates the secretions of the stress hormones. We've looked at cytokines in the immune system that are markers of inflammation. Inflammation generally can be harmful for many medical conditions. And so it again kind of flattens out the inflammatory response. And then we've even looked at the DNA at the telomere length, which is the tips of the DNA that's associated with cell aging, and shown that it can slow that. What happens is that the telomeres get shorter as cells age, and it can slow the shortening of telomere length potentially. So, there's many different ways that a sustained practice of mindfulness meditation can affect people's experience. So if you have more questions about the research, happy to address them. And what I'm going to do now actually is a little bit more of the experiential stuff that, sort of give you some practices you'd be able to use. And this is based on what we know about the nervous system. So taking the big picture, the nervous system can be broken down into our voluntary nervous system. That's things we do on purpose, like I'm going to raise my hand, I'm going to scratch my nose, versus the autonomic or automatic nervous system. And so that controls all the things we don't have to think about. Like we don't have to remind our heart to beat. We don't have to remind ourselves to breathe, right? So your lung function, your heart function, your digestion, all your hormones that are being secreted, that's all controlled by the autonomic nervous system. And so within the autonomic nervous system, this little diagram shows you what we call arms or branches, and that we want to keep in balance, but they kind of seesaw around a little bit. So one is what we call S, is the sympathetic. That's what you've heard of as the fight or flight response, right? So, you're driving your car, a dog runs in front. Oh my gosh, you jump, you feel that nervous zing, your foot goes to the brakes, your heart's racing, your palms are sweaty. That's because your sympathetic nervous system kicked in very rapidly. You had that fight or flight response. And that's very adaptive for things like that are these acute stressors. It prepares you, to really focus into the blood goes to your muscles, it sort of shuts down all the housekeeping, like your digestion and that. And so that fight or flight response is adaptive in the short term, but the problem in our kind of society, the way it's set up now, is that we keep having those stress responses, but they don't get discharged, right? It's not a dog running in front of your car. It's an argument with your spouse, or it's worrying about your cancer treatments, or it's trouble at work, right? And so it just builds and builds, and we get this chronic arousal of that sympathetic nervous system, which can be unhelpful. And so the counter side is what we call rest and digest, or the parasympathetic. This is the relaxation side of the nervous system. And so often we can get out of balance, right? When we have too much of that fight or flight going and not enough of the rest, or, the relaxation response. And so we can actually use the breath, something so simple that we always have with us, to help balance out those arms. So this shows you how it works. Basically, and I often ask people the question, which part of the breath, the inhale or the exhale, do you think is more energizing, and which part is more relaxing? Now, the answer is here if you look at it. But if you just think about it, think about when you're anxious or worried, how do you breathe? Like usually it's like when you're panicked, like you're really breathing in, heavily and quickly. And then when the threat is gone, you might have a big, deep sigh, like, right? You breathe out. And so this diagram just shows you that the parasympathetic, that relaxation response, is associated with the exhalation. And so if we emphasize the exhalation, we emphasize the relaxation. And the sympathetic, or that fight or flight arousal, is associated with the inhalation. So if we emphasize the inhalation, we feel more energized and more ready to go. And so we can introduce breathing exercises that allow us to balance out those arms of the nervous system. So the first couple I'm going to have you guys do are balanced, what we call balanced minis. And the balanced breath tries to get these arms back in balance. So this one here, and we'll try it together. I'll explain it and then we can try it. So here, what we're going to do is visualize kind of a wave. When you close your eyes, you can visualize the wave, and then we're going to add a count to our breath. So as you breathe in, you're going to count up 1, 2, 3, 4. And then as you breathe out, very smoothly go down 4, 3, 2, 1. So we're going to try and have the breath just going in and out like a smooth wave. So why don't you try it? Just close your eyes, sit upright again like we did before. Just let your breath come and go naturally at first. And if 4 feels uncomfortable, like you can't breathe in or out that long, you can make it 2 or 3. Just find a count that fits with the rhythm of your breath. You need to soften through the belly, soften through the chest. Just make space for your breath. And as you breathe in, just visualize going up the wave and cresting as you reach the top of the breath and transition to the out breath, and then slowly sliding down the backside as you breathe out and adding in that count. And so don't rush it. There might be a little sort of pause at the top or the bottom. All right, open your eyes. I love that one. I could do that forever. That felt really good. So hopefully I'd like to hear from you maybe when we get into the Q&A what that felt like. And sometimes it does take a little while to get the hang of it, but hopefully you could sort of feel how that was sort of balancing out your breath and slowing it down a bit. Now this one is a little trickier. It's called square breathing. And here it's still balanced, but what we're doing is adding in a little pause or a holding at the top and the bottom. So you can add in the same count. For example, if we're going to do a perfect square, you breathe in, say for 4. And then when your lungs are mostly full, you hold the breath, and you can try holding it for 4, but you might do like a rectangle and only hold for 2. And then exhale again for 4 until your lungs are mostly empty, and then have that pause for 2 or 4. So try and make it into a square or a rectangle. So let's give it a try. And you don't want to feel too uncomfortable with the pause, like you're gasping for breath. So just experiment a little bit. It helps if your lungs aren't bursting full, if they're just maybe about 80% full. And the same thing at the bottom if they're about, 80% empty. Just doing a couple more squares, but noticing as you do that, the difference between pausing with lungs full versus empty, if you notice anything there. Okay, so let's open up your eyes. I'd be curious to hear how that was. If you want to share in the chat, feel free to do so about your experience, how it feels. And then, so those two were balanced, with equal emphasis on the in and out. Now I'm going to show you one that takes advantage of that idea that the out breath is more relaxing. So here, what we're doing is kind of a triangle, but we're going to just pause after the out breath. So you'll breathe in for 4 and out immediately, say for 4. And then you just have the pause at the bottom with your lungs mostly empty. So in that way, 2 of the 3 sides are kind of emphasizing the exhalation. So it's in for nice smooth transition, out, and then the pause. So try and do that, making the triangle with your breath. Have to just experiment with the length, and the pause can be, a bit shorter if it's uncomfortable. So try and get a rhythm that feels good. All right, let's open our eyes from that one. And I'd be curious to hear if you did find that felt relaxing or not. And then we're going to wake you up a little bit here at the end and do the opposite. We call this the upside down triangle, or the invigorating triangle. So it's the same idea, but we're going to now emphasize holding only after the in breath. So you breathe out 2, 3, 4, right into in 2, 3, 4, and then pause with your lungs mostly full. So here we're swapping it around, and 2 of the 3 sides are emphasizing the in breath rather than the out breath, right? Which is the invigorating breath. So give it a try. If you again, you want to get the hang of the rhythm of exhale, inhale, then pause. And usually having the pause with your lungs about 80% full feels most comfortable. So experiment with it a little bit. often people say that as they're pausing with the lungs full, you can kind of feel the energy building in that pause. And then there's that release with the exhale. All right, let's open our eyes for that one. So again, I'd like to hear how that went, how that felt. And when would you want to use this kind of breath? Like most people are, more typically, I would say using the breath to help them relax. But if you're feeling really fatigued and you're tired and you need to drive or stay awake for something, that's when you might use this invigorating triangle breath. And these mini breathing exercises, all the ones we went through, you can do them in a couple of minutes. You don't have to have your eyes closed. You can do them while you're sitting at a red light. You can do them when you're getting your blood drawn, when you're waiting for an appointment, when you're in line at the grocery, like really any time. No one has to know you're even doing it if you keep your eyes open like that. So they're really good, just very quick things to help you, stop, take a pause, even if you're in a stressful situation, if you have to give a talk, right? It's a good way to help you kind of focus and calm down. So just to summarize, then, we know that mindfulness is present moment, non-judgmental awareness with acceptance. It's a way of being in the world that's cultivated through formal meditation practice. And programs like MBSR and MBCR train people in mindfulness and help decrease a range of symptoms like anxiety, stress, depression. And the mindful awareness and many exercises can help people cope with everyday stressors as they arrive. So I'm going to stop there. There's some contact information if you want to go to my website or follow me on Twitter or send me a message. There's my email. There's also a Facebook page for mindfulness-based cancer recovery and some guided meditations on that link that people could use. So I will stop there and open it for any questions.
Well, Linda, there was a question earlier on that you probably missed in the chat. It's regarding that you mentioned yoga, but whether Tai Chi has been considered.
Oh, yeah. I can see these questions now. So we've actually done a whole study on Tai Chi, a sort of Tai Chi Qigong program. It's called the MATCH study. And so we actually compared, and there was over 600 people from Calgary and Toronto. And they got to choose whether they wanted to do a Tai Chi Qigong program or the mindfulness meditation program. And actually, we haven't analyzed the data yet. So I don't know how they stack up against each other, but there is a lot of other data on Tai Chi and Qigong showing that it can be really beneficial too. So I think having an embodied practice or a movement practice is beneficial, but the specifics of it, it can be any one of those things I think can be helpful.
Well, there's some great information here. I'm just wondering about, I was disappointed when Alberta Cancer Exercise dropped the yoga portion of their initial program. There's a few of us that were involved in the initial True North study that included the yoga. And, it seemed to be a huge benefit. In fact, I personally, there was a bunch of us that continued on, and we still do yoga today.
That's great. Well, I think that Wellspring has yoga programs, ongoing drop-in programs that people can go to.
Yeah, there is. And I think also Dr. Lin Yang is in a study at
That's right.
Prostate Cancer Center for newly diagnosed prior to treatment.
And that's for Tai Chi. So I'm actually a co-investigator on that study. Yeah, so that's currently recruiting to look at a Tai Chi program for men with early stage prostate cancer.
Yeah, so it's exciting that we're now incorporating this. When I was first diagnosed in 2009, there was nothing available at that time through.
Yeah, and even though we've had programs, often when patients come to it, they're like, oh, I wish I knew about this when I was first diagnosed. Like it took me 2 years to learn about it, So we've tried so hard to get the word out, but there's just so much information going around when people are going through treatments that, often it's not on their radar.
Oh yeah, it's just overwhelming.
Yeah.
So it's great that you're taking time to do presentations like this to help spread the word, because
yeah, and if anyone is interested in taking our mindfulness-based cancer recovery program, you can sign up online through AHS, and the next one starts in the fall.
Oh, excellent. And that would be available through your website?
I don't know if the sign up is, but the place, I should actually just find the link here. Hold on. Or maybe Dorothy could even find it. It is through Alberta Health Services. You have to sort of search mindfulness-based cancer recovery or psychosocial. There, I find things a little difficult to find, quite honestly, on that website, but there's an online sign up now. Do you want to look for it, Dorothy, or do you want me to find it?
On it, yep.
Yeah, see if you can find it, because you could share the link and people can just sign up online. And I'm not sure if it's open for the fall program yet or not, but there is a spot where it'll be available.
Yeah, it's interesting about the practice. So when we were doing the regular breathing 4 in, 4 out, through the yoga study, it was very, very easy to fall into that. But as soon as we introduced the hold your breath for 4 seconds, it changed the whole dynamic. Yeah.
Well, I'd be curious how that was for people. Like, which one did you like the best? Did you sort of?
I like the regular breathing.
The wave one.
The last one, the inverted triangle, was the better out of the other 3.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, and everybody's different in what feels comfortable and what their preference is. I like the relaxing triangle with the pause after the exhalation. I find that one very calming and peaceful.
Yeah, see, and I was the opposite. When I exhale, I want to breathe in right away. Get that.
Right.
Me too.
Close, I got air in my lungs, I'm okay, but after that.
Yeah, after the exhale, if I paused 2 or 3, I became anxious and had to breathe in, and then that became a quick breathe in to if you like recover.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
Interesting. Well, it does take some practice to be comfortable with those kind of breaths that ask you to hold your breath. It's fun to experiment with it, because you do get more comfortable over time. And I'm a scuba diver, so I have a history of scuba diving. And when you do that, it's just a way to preserve air and a way to control your buoyancy. You exhale and then you pause for a really long time before you inhale again. So for me, it reminded me of that, which is a very kind of peaceful, place to be. So it feels more comfortable, I think, just because of that.
I was involved, as Brad was, with the yoga program, and when that stopped, I stopped. But more recently, I have taken on this Tai Chi.
Oh,
and
great!
I've found that I guess it's because I'm older as well. I'm my late 70s. I find that Tai Chi exercises are more agreeable to what I'm able to do. And also the teacher, she is Chinese, and she tries to emphasize how important the breathing part is, with the balance in the yin and the yang and so on. So I'm enjoying that.
That's great. And there's a lot of evidence, like I sort of summarized, looking at the benefits of Tai Chi for things like balance and, strength, as well as the mental aspects of feeling relaxed and decreasing stress. So I think it's whatever practice of that nature that you like, I think is the one you're going to do. And the one you do is the best one, right?
Yeah, it's good advice. Thank you.
Posted the link, but it is just to the PDF version of the pamphlet. It doesn't look like the registration is open yet for the fall.
Okay. Did you find the registration link? but it wasn't.
No, I just
No.
found the PDF. So
Huh. Well, that booklet has the phone number too. So another thing you can do is just call the department and get on a wait list.
yeah, and that's kind of what I thought too. So phone
Yeah.
number's there.
Yeah. And I don't know if we'll be doing it on Zoom in the fall or if we'll be back to in person. I mean, the nice thing about the Zoom groups is that people can join from anywhere in the province. And obviously you don't have to drive in and things like that. So you could call in and just get on the wait list. And then once we know what's happening in the fall, you get a call back.
And that number's in, or the link is in the chat. So
Yeah, if you click on that link, it'll take you to a pamphlet you can read or download.
and there it is. Yeah, just click on it there. It'll pop it open. You can save that in your PDF files. And
Yeah, and Wellspring also offers a similar program where we train some of their facilitators. So if the Tom Baker program doesn't work for you, and I'm not sure if Wellspring in Edmonton is doing it, but I know Wellspring in Calgary has been offering it, now and then too.
yeah, and I think Wellspring has just opened up this month to their
Yeah.
in-house programming. So that's another opportunity to reconnect.
I think everybody's dying to get back to seeing each other in person.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
you got that right. So good. Wow, such a quiet group. Some of them may be watching hockey on
Oh,
I don't
yeah, it's a
wanna-
playoff game, isn't it?
Yeah, that's okay. Calgary's not playing tonight, so we're living in the moment here on Zoom. So perfect. Wow.
There was one other question about, would this be different lying flat on bed or carpet? Yeah, is that for the breathing? Is that what
Yes.
that question was? Yeah, absolutely. Like, it actually is. Often when I do in class with people, we do a lying down because it's a lot easier to feel the movement of the breath when your body's, straight rather than bent and you're sitting. So yeah, if you want to practice some of those breaths, it's a good way to do it. Or even if you're like lying in bed at night and you're having trouble sleeping, doing some of those, the wave breath or the relaxing triangle can be really helpful to two things: to relax your body physiologically, but also to distract your mind from, whatever you're worrying about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, I just want to again thank you for your time this evening. A special thank you to Dr. Linda Carlson.
All right, take care, everybody. Have a good evening.